I'm not really into roguelikes, or roguelites. I've given them a fair shake and realized that they're not my thing. But I do like 3D platformers and anything involving sharp objects, so Tower Princess seemed like it was up my alley. And so far, I've been enjoying it. Tower Princess is an upcoming roguelite developed by Aqua Team. I have to try very hard to make sure I don't pronounce that as Aqua Teen. The full game isn't out yet, but the demo version is subtitled Knight's Trial and is available on Steam. The closest comparison I can make is if Rogue Legacy was in 3D and the action wasn't as frenetic. In terms of its looks, it reminds me of Pumpkin Jack of all things. Jumps are weighty but have a bit of hang time, and the combat controls are pretty responsive for the most part. Each session begins with you choosing your knight. In the demo, there are two classes available, Sword and Gun. Primary attack is mapped to square, and class skills are mapped to triangle and circle. Class skills operate on cooldown timers. Jumping is mapped to X, and dodge rolling is mapped to right trigger. If you're a sword knight, your primary attack is a 3-hit combo if you mash square. There's a bit of a lull between combo strings, so be mindful of your spacing with the enemy during those dead spots. The sword knight can do a stinger attack with triangle, and a spinning blade attack with circle. If you're a gun knight, your primary attack is to fire your rifle. There's no precision aiming in the game, so you'll have to lock onto enemies by pressing in right stick to send your shots where you want them to go. Your rifle can hold up to 5 rounds. Once you've used them up, you gotta wait for the rifle to reload, but you can fire off a round as soon as it's available and interrupt the reload process. The gun knight can do a power shot with triangle that doesn't consume any rifle ammo. I'm not entirely sure if the second gun skill is an offensive or defensive move, as pressing circle will cause a knight to fire off a shot that propels them away from the target. Besides their combat styles, knights can vary based on the prefixes affixed to their classes. A balanced knight will have an equal distribution of stats, which are health, attack power, and movement speed. Light knights skew more towards movement speed, and heavy knights seem to be more resilient at the expense of mobility. The goal of the game is to rescue a princess. Within the castle, there are princesses locked up in cages, waiting for their knights to sweep them off their feet and take them back to their respective kingdoms. When you rescue a princess, she follows you throughout your run of the castle. If you're worried that the game ends up becoming an escort mission, rest assured, it doesn't. The princesses act as a third skill. Each of them has a princess power that you can use like any of your class skills. And like class skills, princess powers recharge on cooldown timers, but I think they run a little longer than class skills for balance purposes. In the demo, I found 4 princesses. You start with rescuing the kobold princess in the tutorial. She can stun enemies for a brief period, which gives you the chance to dish out some free damage. There's also the Olympic princess for players who are really into snoo snoo. She can cast a wind spell that spawns mini tornadoes that damage enemies with the side benefit of slightly increasing your movement speed. If you're worried that this game is too sexist because all these damsels are in distress, you can rescue Sunder, a twink looking for the next club to hop, who might actually be a magic sword. He can buff up your attacks and extend your melee range by adding energy attacks to every sword swipe. But if you really want to win the game, get the zombie princess. She sets down a healing aura that can recover 2 full hearts. I'm not gonna lie, every successful run I've had was because I used her as a crutch. I'm sure it's possible to get by without her heals, but boy do they help. Once you enter the castle with your princess, the floors will mix and match prefab layouts. Eventually, you'll pick up on which rooms you're in and what enemies will be present. The basic enemies are kobolds, who seem to follow the Japanese interpretation of the monster, and not the European version that likens them to dwarves and gnomes. Kobolds will either attack you with spears or fire at you with their own rifles. Be careful of the ranged kobolds, because they can plink you to death if you don't pay attention to the timing of their shots. There's also a red variant that's chuftier than their green cousins. There are also cube slimes, which leave slime trails on the floor. Getting caught in their slime will drastically reduce your mobility, of which the slimes take advantage because they'll start charging towards you. Smaller slimes only need 2 hits to dissipate, but the larger versions need to be broken up before you can dispatch them. Next up are walking pots that light the lava projectiles at your position. Get too close to them, and they'll do an AoE attack. Simple enough to dodge your shots and get some hits in when they're not popping off. Then there are wisps that come in either ice or fire variants. They send out a projectile that's easy to avoid so long as you're aware of it. Bait the shot, then hit them once to get rid of them. The strongest enemy unit in the demo is the walking armor. They'll do 3 different attacks with their halberds. You need to hit them from behind to expose their core, and then keep the pressure on them until they collapse. They're kind of the worst because once you expose their core, it's hard to tell if you're making any progress with their attacks. I think your hits count if they flash blue, but I never had a consistent feel with these types. You need to clear the room of enemies before you can progress. Sometimes there's an optional enemy hiding among the boxes that you can attack for a free item. Be careful though, because it has a projectile attack that can catch you off guard and cost you more than the item you get from it. Speaking of items, there's a bunch of gear you can pick up to make your journey through the castle a bit easier. Health potions are always handy, and they come in small and big variants. There are also consumable weapons that I didn't really use that often, but the chakrams are great if you're a sword knight, because they can give you a ranged option you otherwise wouldn't have. What makes them really useful is that you can get a few charges out of them instead of a single use. One of the more interesting item types is a piñata, which comes in either common or rare versions. You deploy one and then attack it to get 2 more items. Sometimes you get piñatas from piñatas, and you can have an infinite chocolate moment. If you don't want to use an item, you can hold down left trigger and press a D-pad input mapped to that item. Personally, I just use up the item and then pick up whatever I want. If you end up dying, which you most likely will in the early game, your class retains the experience you picked up during your runs. This means that your class will always progress, even if you don't. That kind of persistence is where I found the Rogue Legacy similarities, but I haven't seen anything to suggest that you can add improvements to the hub, like in Rogue Legacy. Sometimes you find gifts in the castle that you can give to whichever princess you've got in tow. Not sure what this does other than to butter them up. Despite having the look and feel of a kid's game, it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed by the enemies and traps in Tower Princess. You'll be running through spiked floors and dodging spinning blades or fire traps in one room, and then in the next room, you'll have to deal with some slimes, a kobold, and a walking armor. You gotta be smart and take on 1 or 2 enemies at a time, and keep in mind how and when each enemy will attack. It's a roguelite, but you can go far if you also treat it as a Souls-lite. There's only one boss in the demo, but he puts up a decent fight. It's gonna take some perseverance to clear his health bar, but once you do, the demo ends and takes you to the game's Steam page. This also happens if you spend more than 20 minutes playing the game. I like what I see so far. The combat is as simple as it needs to be, and the randomness doesn't really have any impact on the gameplay, at least in this early state. If you're hoping for some more RNG situations, you might end up disappointed. But I look at the game more as a light dungeon crawler that has randomly connected rooms to mix up the challenge. It's also a cute waifu collector. We all have that one person that's just out of reach. Maybe they're already committed to someone else. Maybe they're playing hard to get. Maybe they exist in a completely different dimension, and you find yourself asking if a 3D boy could ever get with a 2D girl.
I'm good.
Well, this game won't bring you any closer to your goal, but at least you can distract yourself with your harem of waifus. Try out Tower Princess's demo on Steam.